Thank you so much. And somehow this very big monkey always ends on the shoulders of policymakers. Now I'm a former policymaker, so I'll try to sort of give three different sort of input as to what I've been asked to say something about the role of policymakers. First, well, obviously the role of policymakers will be to set the overall direction. The overall direction as has been done with the SDGs and as has been done with the Paris Agreement. Okay, this is the direction. This is where we need to be respectively in 2030 and 2050. But of course, this is only words. Nonetheless, important words, because what do these two significant international multilateral agreements signal? They signal that we have to change our growth paradigm, basically. That we have to get away from the old north-south divide to a mutually interdependent way of thinking. We have to have a much more integrated approach to growth. We have to get rid of the silos, and we have to think much more long-term. So far, so good. That is what we have all signed up to, with one exception that we all know of. I would, in a way, disagree with Mr. Peng, who earlier said that there is a question, there's a challenge with policymakers not sort of being aware of the challenges. I would argue, yes, they are aware when it comes to climate change. With, again, some few exceptions, they are aware. But the problem is that now we get to the difficult part. The part where you really need to translate all these nice intentions into real deeds and actions. Take energy first. I would argue that by and large there, the world has started on this sort of transitional way. We can see it with the cost of renewables and all the things we've been discussing today. A lot is happening there. It's really, really good. More enabling environments, more incentives. Things are somehow starting to take off there. That is very good. But yet I would argue that that was the easy part. And I know we are not finished with that part yet, but the next steps are getting much more difficult. Much more difficult. Why is that? Because the next steps have to be much bigger and bolder. We have to move into a field where we have absolute reductions and not just relative reductions, and the time is of essence here. We have to move much faster. So now we come into there where you need, as a policymaker, as a government, to embrace the structural changes, really substantial structural changes. That is incredibly difficult. Mr. Brill was referring to the many different tribes and people being in their own silos. Policymakers and governments somehow have to address all the tribes at the same time and get acceptance there. So they have to do this extremely challenging, complex transition exactly at a time where the political establishment and also the economic establishment is being challenged like never before almost. They are being challenged, their legitimacy is being questioned, their authority, their credibility is really being challenged. And then they have, in this sort of environment, to come up with systemic, holistic, well thought through, across the silos solutions. Not that easy. Yet I will argue that that is exactly what we all need to realize we have to do now. I don't know about you. I get the feeling that a lot of young people out there, they are getting impatient. And I also have the feeling that if not establishment very, very soon can prove that our existing economic model can manage to deliver the answers to the climate change challenges, to the resource challenges, all this, sustainability, then we will see a radicalization that will not be good for the climate fight, because when people are radicalized and new ideologies sort of will be, people will go back to the trenches, and that will not be the environment in which policymakers or business people or economic interests are going to really move away from business as usual. But I really feel that there is this anti-growth sentiment, anti-capitalist movement starting, and sort of anti-system sentiments. I think this is dangerous. Why? Because pressure is good, but total polarization, that is not very good. So yes, there is a dilemma for policymakers that they have to sort of show the way, take the bold decisions, the difficult decisions, while at the same time they are challenged on their authority. However, I will argue that where until recently it was maybe more, it took more political courage to act than not to act in this field. I think we are seeing that it's changing now. It's getting more dangerous for policymakers not to embrace these agendas. I'll give you an example towards the end, but I really think that now the time is to show that we can take the bold steps. We must show that the social market economy can deliver the change and that it can deliver it in a way that citizens can accept. Just a few examples of what I mean with the structural thing. Many of you have mentioned carbon pricing, which of course is extremely important. We also all know why we're not going to get a global price on carbon anytime soon. Nonetheless, I would argue that any responsible government now should have it as a principle for economic policy decision-making to price not only emissions, but resources, waste, to create the incentive structure in a much more consistent manner, to use our taxation and tariffs much more sort of directed so that it gives the right incentives towards the SDGs and the climate Paris Agreement, what we have agreed to do. I think that in any finance ministry, whenever there is a bigger policy initiative, it should be mandatory. It should be a sort of something you were obliged to sort of make it visible. If we pass this piece of legislation or this political agreement, would that diminish the problems we have said we were going to solve, or will it enlarge it? I mean, will it make us go closer towards where we are going, or will it distance ourselves more from that? Why also not have 5 years carbon budgets? They have experienced that in Britain, as far as I can see, with very, very good success. That's one of the successes from Britain. The triple bottom line, it's extremely important. LCA was mentioned earlier, I think also by Mr. Peng, life cycle analysis. It is not just sort of a fancy word. It really means something. It's a strong tool in hands of finance ministries if it was actually applied. So to have it into the core of our economic policy making, that is the big challenge now. That's why we could take some of the next big steps. Transport is another one. Yes, we're talking a lot about electrification and the change from transport to mobility, and it's extremely good, and I think it's taking on now, but it's also about sort of the more structural things. I mean, if it's cheaper to take the plane than to take the train, and if it's more convenient to take the plane than to take the train, if we're not pooling our resources really to sort of do with our infrastructure what needs to be done in order to have any chance to really go to a low-carbon world, to really reach the SDGs, I mean, we will find ourselves here 2030, 2040, we will not have moved very far. It's also about sort of making the default solution the green solution. It's about city planning. In other words, it's really about politics. And just the third area I could mention would be agriculture. Also there we need regulation. We have talked about subsidies. For instance, in Europe, we are subsidizing agriculture a lot, but we are not subsidizing the change in the agriculture and food production system that we need. So again, getting the pricing right and use that for changing sectoral policies. I think that's really important, and it goes also for the efficiency, resource efficiency, circular economy. But one more thing should be added there. One word that policymakers would normally not like, and that is sort of the behavioral thing. I mean, man is not just an economic rational animal. We need a layer more. So also to talk about the values and the different approaches, the attitudes, the lifestyle, not that policymakers should regulate all of that down in the details, but to talk about it in the public sphere, I think, is what we need now. And of course also to very much focus on research and development. So to show the solutions. And just one final point there. I don't know if you have the same feeling as I have. You know, we have a lot of green people there, sustainability people there, discussing lots of challenges here. And then we have a lot of people talking about digitalization, artificial intelligence, blockchain, a lot of interesting new technologies that could be useful, but somehow we are not linking these two categories. What could we do if we were smarter in combining these two worlds, so to speak? So my final point should just be, I think that we need political leadership more than we have done for quite a while. And why, and you would ask that then, why is that not coming? And the very, very short answer, and of course too simplistic answer, but that is because those who have political power, they are afraid of the incumbents. They are afraid of the vested interest. And I'm sorry to say, we have heard a lot of good stuff here today, but the vested interests are still the majority, and people like yourself is still in the minority. But let me end on an interesting, I hope, positive note. Last Friday, I attended this meeting at the Confederation of Danish Industries. In Denmark, we perceive ourselves as the green frontrunners. It's sometimes true and sometimes it's not so true, but they sat there. All the CEOs from the biggest companies from all sorts of sectors in Denmark. And the agenda was to talk, how can we implement the SDGs? And I thought when I'd listened to them for the first hour, we are only in the logo phase. You know, it's on the slides now, it's on the logo, it's maybe on the letterhead, but it's not really changing things. And then we started that discussion, and before that meeting ended, all these CEOs agreed among themselves that incremental steps are no longer enough, and they could not do it themselves. So they decided that now, and we are having elections in Denmark very soon, they would write a joint letter and make it public to say, now, dear policymakers, you need to start and address the real structural changes. And if you do so, we are ready to support you. So just let me finish with that, because policymakers, they are not evil people, they're not stupid people, but it's extremely complex, and we need to have the business sector and the policy sector to partner up and really together go out with the positive solutions and the message how this is possible. I really believe that it is, but still too many citizens do not know it, and that's why it's still challenging for policymakers to do what is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. And after that inspiration, we do have time for one quick question, so I'd like to open it up. But really, incremental steps are not enough, and that's the takeaway, that society has to come together and work with the businesses and policymakers to really ramp up this generation's challenge. A quick question from the audience, or a comment? Got somebody up front.
Okay, then I'll take it. Thanks a lot, Connie Hedegaard. I agree with almost all that you said, but I would like to give a rebuttal on your assessment that those who want to change are in the minority. I would not go along with that. I think the incumbents, they're just very powerful, but they're not the majority. That would be my challenge, in a sense, how you see this in terms of who they represent, in terms of number of people, and whose interest would be served if we stick in the current system, whereas if we made a change. It's more a comment, and of course we can discuss on this. And I would like to ask a quick thing. You described this as a potential threat, a radicalization. Obviously radical is a negative word, but let's think about this youth movement that is now emerging, that has already been bubbling up. I personally see this as a very positive development, and it may actually be needed, in my view, to encourage policymakers, to force policymakers to take more transformative change.
Don't get me wrong, I think it's extremely positive, and as I said, pressure is very much needed. It's only if it goes over in, I give up to work with the political system because they are not delivering, and goes into sort of real radicalization, then I'm not sure that it is what we need right now. And that is not a criticism of those who are engaging, but that is a call for policymakers to understand that it is now you need to change. Because if you don't show that you can do it within the existing system, then you are off for something that you could not dream of, that you would see something probably similar to the kind of discussions we had back in the 70s. And I'm just saying, in that kind of environment, many people would stick to business as usual and not dare investing in very new ways of doing things. So that's why we risk losing time.
Half a minute, a quick.
So very short. So if you should give one call to action to the business sector, what will that be?
And that could link to the other part of what we heard before, because it's right that there are many good guys, and I meet all the good business guys at all sorts of conferences on this topic, and that's really, really good. But the organized interest for business, take Europe, Business Europe, the Chamber of Commerce, whatever it is, yes, a lot is happening, but as long as 50% of these democratic organizations' members do not dare to give them the authority to really go for and push policymakers for bolder decisions, then you would often, out of these strong organizations, get messages on something quite else, some short-term interest, or please don't regulate too much, don't do this too fast. That's where I think that we need to change the culture there, because if that really came as a strong call from the organized business interest, then it makes an impact on policymakers.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Connie, for your unwavering climate leadership. And next up, Alexander Voigt, please take the stage. Alexander is a founder and CEO of GRIPS AG and LUMENION, and he'll be talking to us a little bit around policymakers and innovation. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, hello. I want to reduce a little bit the volume of my presentation, because I think it's late and a lot of things have been said already for several times. My name is Alex. I'm studied physics and mathematics and methodology during the 80s. And this brought me to the fact that, it is not enough to talk about problems. You have to work on solutions. And one solution that fascinated me was to use solar energy as a source of energy. At this time, it was very expensive. The modules you could buy were called terrestrial modules because most of them were used in space. And after my university time, I spent a few months at a strategic consultancy using their normal tools, industrial costs based on material costs, learning curves, whatever. And we found out with the partners in 3 months that the cost of solar electricity is 4 German Pfennigs at this time. It was in fact on the market at 4 Deutschmark, which is a factor of 100 away. And it was obvious that you only have to do it big scale, and then you will arrive at these costs. And but everybody was stuck away with this knowledge, and I grabbed it and said, okay, this is my journey. I will do this. And the funny thing is, when we started in the middle of the 90s, everybody said it's crazy, and now we are there. When we started, the production of solar modules was a roughly 80 megawatt. Now it's 80 gigawatt, more than 80 gigawatt, which is a factor of 1,000, which is still far away from what we need. But I mean, the positive thing is, if you have the right ideas and you find the right people, you can go ahead and change the world. This is number one. I'm happy to talk to you about shortly what we are doing right now, because we need more steps, because solar modules and wind parks are not an energy system. And then further on, I want to talk with you about my experience from, I'm always saying, from San Francisco to Sydney, because this is the range that I covered in the last 20 years with my businesses, on what we can really do as consumers, as citizens, and as policymakers to speed up the change towards a CO2-free economy. I mean, these slides we have seen a lot before. I only want to show them because I was really glad that these SDGs kicked in, because 10 years, 12 years ago, most of the people were thinking in terms of CO and renewable energy. You only have to have cheap solar energy, you only have to have cheap wind parks, and the thing is done. And I think now we are much more aware that we need much more than this in the future. We need peace, we need food, we need something to wear. So we have our whole life has to change to end up in a sustainable future. And I think now we have these sustainability development goals are giving us the right optics to look at the world. What I'm doing right now is, knowing that it's not enough only to focus on energy, I joined with people and we founded a small industrial holding in Germany, and we say ourselves we are an SDG catalyst. In a way, in the moment we are a bunch of startups again, but in a few years we want to be a one-stop shop for companies, for business-to-business services, for organizations who want to work on reaching SDG goals on all levels, from energy to circular economy, and also from the metrics and the measurements that you need to do without this. In the moment, I'm running a company, LUMENION, and what we are doing is, it sounds crazy, we are building huge energy storage systems that store energy, renewable energy, as high temperature heat. Why are we doing this? Because more than 50% of the energy that we need in an industrialized country is needed as heat, not as electricity. And if you want to decarbonize the sources of heat, you cannot use gas any longer. Because with gas you can be efficient, less efficient, whatever, but you still will produce CO2. And we have another problem with the renewable energy. I mean, a lot of you will know pictures like this. This is the generation profile of a renewable energy park that's big enough to cover the electrical needs of Germany. The electrical need is at this 80 gigawatt, at this red line. And you see, most of the time, we have maybe a factor 5 or 10 of this electrical need that we need in the grid. So what to do with this energy? You need to take it on a regional level out of the system, you have to store it, and you have to use it when you need it. But most of the time, you don't need more electricity because you have enough. So what do you need to do with this energy? You need to convert it into other energy sources that you also need. That's something like hydrogen, that is heat. These are energy flows that, from my point of view, will help to create value creation on a regional level. I mean, this is something different than we heard from my Chinese friend, who's a big fan of connecting all the world. I mean, my approach is completely different. I think we need a future where we have value creation on a regional level. Let's come to this later. So we are linked to the electrical grid. We can give a lot of services also to the grid providers, whatever. And on the other side, supplying process heat to the petrochemical industry, food production industry, and everywhere where we have decentralized strong needs for for steam in a way. The second company that we are running with is a company who is able to act as the supplier of this energy, because it sounds crazy, but in a lot of in the big parts of the world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, renewable energy is much cheaper than the diesel fuel that they are using in the moment to burn energy. But the business model is completely different, because you know the cost for the diesel is arriving exactly with the production line and with the revenues. If they go for a solar system and a battery and a storage system, they have to put up a huge amount of money up front, and then they have an amortization time over a long period, and nobody can afford this. It's also too risky. And we are tackling with this, GRIPS is the Global Renewable Independent Power Supplier, and we are tackling this problem. And you know, this is also where I'm linked up with Cara, who we heard before in the fashion industry, and we are converting in the moment. We are in the process of converting more than 150 production sites in the textile industry, helping these local factories to get access to renewable power based on new business models. So in a way, it's a financing game on this. Now coming to what I have learned in the past. You know, the speak about tribes. I think this is fundamentally true in different tribes. In the past, we had also always the challenge to grow very fast with the companies, more than a factor of 3 every year. You have to hire people like hell, because if you have something that the market is needing, woof, the customers ask for it, you have to grow. And what we found out is that you have only a very few people among in the whole crowd who are happy to organize and to think about how to change. Most of the people are really good in doing day-to-day business and keeping things online as they are. And this is the reason why we separated the tribes to grow the business and to run the business. And if you want to have change, you need the tribe to grow the business. And what I would propose is that we have to, in order to meet the sustainable development goals, that we bring all the challenges on a regional level, because the regions are very much different. It's very different, Bavaria from Schleswig-Holstein, whatever. You need to have the inventions, how to move towards this sustainable future on a regional level. You need to measure the status and the goals. You have to figure out how to do it, and also you have to include circular economy on a local level. And I think this is 100 years after we had the big foundation of the Bauhaus in Germany, which created modern architecture. I think we need something like regional Bauhauses to create sustainable life in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you. Maybe just a quick question from me. So what's your message for today's young people to get involved in this movement and to be a part of the grand transition?
You know, I think it is exactly the right thing. I think if we look, we should take them very serious, and I think we should make them as a part of the solution and not only claiming for us to have caused the problem. I think if you would have the possibility to engage on a regional level for young people in order to figure out in schools, in universities, with local entrepreneurs, whatever, ways and steps to walk into this future, I think then you can turn their energy into something positive. And I think this is really very much needed.
Thank you so very much. And now I'd like to invite Jessica Cheam to come and join us up here. Jessica is the managing editor of Eco-Business, a journalist and social entrepreneur, well known for her journalism around environmental action and climate change. And you'll be talking to us a little bit about how to engage society at large.
Yes, thank you very much, Max. Thank you very much for inviting me here, Alejandra, and as well as Venice International University. I actually left Singapore 2 days ago, and I've come all the way here to bring Asia to you and the story. I'm going to introduce myself very quickly. I'm managing editor of EcoBusiness. EcoBusiness is Asia Pacific's leading media organization focused on sustainable development. We are actually 10 years old this year. We actually were founded and started in the run-up to the Copenhagen climate change talks, where actually that's where I first met Connie. It was because in Asia at that time, I was a journalist in mainstream media. It was routinely ignored. Sustainability and climate change was not on the agenda in Asia. And in a region where there are 4.4 billion people, I thought it was a really, was a gap in the media industry that we needed to fulfill. So we have a very global audience, even though our coverage is on Asia. Jörg here is our advisory board member and an invaluable supporter, and also the reason that I'm here. And we really focus our energies on the 12 verticals that you see here. But right now, we're actually focused on a revamp in the first quarter of the year, in which we're actually reorganizing all our content according to the SDGs. So EcoBusiness actually generates content that is a different sort of content. I mean, if you look at the news today, it's all full of fake news. It's about Donald Trump's tweets. It's about what Kim Kardashian had for dinner. There is just so much noise in mainstream media. So what we try to provide, really, is purposeful journalism. And that is content that actually has a point, but is entertaining, is valuable, and we hope is quite funny as well. If you look here, at the IPCC report, we've heard lots of presentations about that and the urgency of how we should respond. And the image that comes to me, when I come to Venice, and I was here actually 14 years ago when I was doing my master's in journalism in London. And I have to say I'm very happy that it is still as beautiful as I remembered it. But at that time that I was visiting, St. Mark's Square was not subject to the frequent flooding that we see today. And you can see that in 10 years, the urgency and the crisis that we face really is upon us. So this is an image of a skyline in China. And I think the Asian story, everyone is very familiar. The world's economic activity is gravitating towards Asia, and it is really where all the development is happening. But the success stories actually mask the fault lines of what's happening in the region. And we're seeing massive pollution, air pollution, water pollution, huge amounts of waste generation, the West exporting a lot of its waste to Asia, China closing its doors on waste management, and of course waste having a really, really huge impact on climate as well. Provision of healthcare services and public services is straining now because of the huge explosion of the population. And inequality is something that we really, really suffer from. So how do we respond? At EcoBusiness, we focus our efforts on educating and advocating sustainable development. And I'm going to show you a few examples of how we engage citizens. And this is a really short video. I hope you enjoy.
Why we designated 2018 as the year of climate action.
On renewable energy, zero waste, sustainable lifestyles, and youth engagement.
Get young people to connect with nature. That's it. It's that simple.
So this video that you see here was actually an initiative called Changing Course that we launched last year in support of Singapore's Year of Climate Action. Our Minister for Environment and Prime Minister declared 2018 as the Year of Climate Action because they really wanted to capture the public imagination on what it really means to do something about climate change and not just talk about it. Singapore is also the only country in Southeast Asia that has introduced a carbon tax. I know for those in the room, $5 per ton is really small, but that's what Singapore is starting at because they don't want to lose out, in terms of competitiveness with their ASEAN neighbors. But it's a start, and trust me, we're lobbying for them to increase the price. So this exhibition actually was triggered by this exhibition was triggered by an expedition to Antarctica, which actually was started with this e-generation challenge that we kind of partnered City Developments, which is a property developer in Singapore, to engage youths on climate action. And as a tropical person, you can imagine that I hate the cold. So when I was asked to plunge into the Antarctic oceans of -2 degrees, that was quite a challenge, and I nearly chickened out. But my videographer and colleague said, you know, that's going to make good TV, so you have to do it. So I had sacrificed my craft, and the documentary that I made together with Channel News Asia, which is Asia's biggest broadcaster, is going to be broadcasted in 2 months' time. So it triggered this year-long campaign, which had a special focus on renewable energy, zero waste and youth, and it culminated in a photography and short film exhibition, which you just saw in that video. And what we really tried to do is to inspire the public, inspire citizens as to like, why does it matter for them to take action on climate change? And this was the expedition that went to Antarctica, and it was made up of 90 people from all over the world who wanted to find out what's happening there. I mean, all of you are familiar with the stories of climate change, and Antarctica is melting faster than anywhere on Earth. In the last 50 years alone, it has warmed 3 degrees, and there is a phenomenon called the marine ice cliff instability, in which the warmer waters are going underneath the ice sheets and melting them at an incredible rate. So this expedition was a fact-finding mission. We went there to look at what the climate change is doing to the polar regions, and also to try and make the connection between what's happening there in this global landscape is of matter of importance to people in Asia. So we tried to inspire them with thought-provoking images, and we partnered with a whole host of corporates, including Sony, Emirates, OCBC Bank, who all came behind us to launch this exhibition. How many of you remember this picture? So this picture is called Napalm Girl, and it's one of the most memorable pictures of our century. It is also the photo that's been credited for stopping the Vietnam War. And the reason why I post this here is not to shock you, but really to tell you that, or remind you that the power of media is absolutely something that cannot be underestimated. We need to find the images and the stories that will actually make the emotional connection with citizens, so they actually care. So they vote for the right governments, so they vote with their dollar for the right businesses, and actually elicit a response from them. And so we set about telling stories that connect with people, and this is actually a documentary that I filmed 3 years ago in India. And Saga Island in the Sundarbans is actually the fastest sinking island on Earth. And the communities there have lost their homes. It's not something that's happened in the future, they have actually already lost it. This year, this lady, Nira Bibi, she was being interviewed on camera, and she just broke down crying. And it was really emotional for me to be interviewing her, as she tried to tell me through a translator that I wouldn't know what it feels to lose a home that was built by her father's bare hands, and which they had lived for the last 20 years, but has disappeared from the shore. And I think that when we are sitting in our rooms, our corporate boardrooms, and policymakers sitting in their towers, we have to remember that the crisis is actually already upon us. So how do we communicate the urgency? I think is really key. I show this picture because this is the Johor Bahru Reservoir, which Singapore draws 250 million gallons of water per day from Malaysia. Malaysia likes to use it to threaten us. Every time they're pissed off with us, they say, we're going to stop your water. But actually, the reason why I show this picture is because just 2 or 3 years ago, it faced a historic drought, and we had the lowest levels ever. And so I went in there to film some scenes, and actually didn't get permission from the authorities. We did it after, and so I can show this picture to you. But I'm trying to bring home the message that climate change is not some abstract concept, but it's actually something that affects your daily life. So for example, if you don't have water, what's going to happen? We're going to see a rush for survival, a rush for resources, and we're going to see the slow breakdown, disintegration of human society as we know it. So this is actually an initiative that I helmed last year. Actually, it's still going on. It's called the Climate Action SG Alliance. It's a national initiative that was set up at the beginning of the Year of Climate Action. And the lady in red next to me is the Senior Minister of State, Amy Khor. With the support of the government, we formed an alliance made up of about 20 people from business, civic society, academia, industry and schools. And basically, our mission was to advocate climate action in Singapore by raising awareness levels among the public and to translate this awareness into action. So not just talking, but actually doing. I know a lot of words here, but the objectives, if I can just summarize, is to actually analyze the narrative that's happening around climate change and how do we actually translate that to move the needle on action and to actually pull together our resources to scale the initiatives for impact. We actually decided on 3 projects that we will focus on last year. I'm going to go through them very quickly. Project Business was actually an initiative to target businesses that have a lot of consumer-facing activities, so banks, transport companies, retail companies. We also wanted to focus on recycling because this is the message around responsible consumption, and we wanted people to actually realize that what they do in their daily lives has an impact. In schools as well, to education, we wanted to put in an initiative where we are actually educating the kids from a young age as well as teachers. And just a few examples that we managed to achieve. Changi Airport Group, Singapore's prize jewel is our Changi Airport. And Changi Airport actually came on to say that they are going to educate the millions and millions and millions of passengers that come through the airport. KK Women's and Children's Hospital, committing to reducing food waste, increasing recycling. Marina Bay Sands, a huge casino in Singapore, very sustainable in other ways. They have a very good sustainability policy and have got 100% LED lights as well as other energy efficiency initiatives. So I put this report. It's a very interesting report because this was actually launched by the Business for Sustainable Development Commission a couple of years ago. And the people on the commission are made of the who's who in sustainability. Paul Pullman from Unilever, Jack Ma from Alibaba, Ho Ching, Temasek CEO. And they put together this report to actually convince businesses and consumers that focusing on the SDGs can actually be profitable. And so you see on this chart that the business opportunities that comes from delivering affordable and clean energy, good health and well-being in sustainable cities in Asia actually is a $5 trillion prize. And so I show this as an example because the way that you communicate sustainability sometimes has to be framed in the right language for different audiences, whether they are a business audience, an education audience, a consumer audience, you have to cater your messages. This is another example of an initiative that we launched, which is called Plastic Purge, and we made it very, very accessible. Basically, as long as your office is rid of single-use plastic, you can sign on to this initiative. I noticed a few plastic bottles here, but I shall not complain about them since we're on an island. But you can see here that we actually put together something that was very simple to understand, and we tried to explain the connection between plastic consumption and responsible consumption production, and why it's important that people actually be conscious about the waste that they generate and what they consume. So you can see here that it was easy. You can be a business or you can be an individual, and we had a whole host of organizations joining this campaign. These are the individual supporters. They're actually all my team. I forced them to sign up because, I can. So this is another example of videos that we launched under the Project Recycling, and that was really to educate people on what can or cannot be recycled. And I'll tell you a funny story. That guy on the right there is my friend. He's a local TV actor, and he actually made this documentary with us called Follow the Trash. And we actually followed what happens to your recyclables after you put it into the bin, because there's a lot of misconception about recycling. And my marketing manager first actually put a picture of incinerators and waste. And I said, you've got Jason, and you've actually used the picture of waste. So we put Jason on the front of the video, and this video went absolutely viral. It got so much attention that our Prime Minister, Lee Hsien Loong, you can see it on the left, actually shared the video to his millions of followers, and actually started a very, very interesting conversation about waste management and how that actually links to responsible habits and how that links to climate change. And this was one of the most successful campaigns that we launched. And what resulted in our year of climate action, and actually this is an outdated slide, is that we garnered more than 300,000 pledges, the most ever in any campaign in Singapore, to pledge climate action. And so I think we were successful in capturing the public imagination on it, but of course the work is not done because that has to continue in the years to come. So moving on to some other initiatives that we have in the region and globally. Yes, I'm going to close now. This is a initiative called the Livability Challenge, which is actually in partnership with Temasek, our flagship state investment firm, and it's basically global call for solutions in sustainability, and we provide a $1 million prize. I'm now going to just very briefly talk about Transforming Asia Pacific. It's an event that we hold with UN Environment, in which we produce policy briefs and videos to inspire people. Climate Photo Challenge, those of you who were at the WBCSD Council meeting in Singapore last year would have seen this photo challenge. And we also focus on sustainable finance, and we're going to be launching actually a sequel documentary in the Arctic next year. So I'm just going to end very quickly with a video that is just a 1-minute clip of the documentary that we made on Antarctica. I hope that it will inspire you or give you ideas, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
We traveled from Asia to Antarctica on a voyage that would teach us about the connection between the two continents. We are drawn here by an explorer who has dedicated his life to protecting Antarctica and who believes Asia is key to this mission.
It's a message from Robert Swan from the Antarctic. The Pole Energy Challenge is on schedule, on time, so you all feel sorry for us. It was bloody cold when we arrived on the aeroplane this morning. A reminder of where we are, 600 nautical miles from the South Pole. So, all the very best. Message ends.
Hello, this is Jessica Cheam, Eco-Business. Hello, this is Jessica, Eco-Business.
So that's just the very short clip. You can find the documentary online. I'm just going to end with this picture of my kids. When I left Singapore 2 days ago, they were like, "Mama, why do you have to travel again?" I said, "Well, I'm trying to protect your future." So I hope everybody here is going to help me fulfill my promise to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. I think we're going to have to move right along. It's clear that the power of media can connect us to the global story. So next up, I'd like to invite Maxim Titov to come and join us up here. He's a professor at the European University at St. Petersburg. And he's the head of the Energy Policy Research Center. And he'll be talking to us a little bit about communication with civil society, the case of the Russian Arctic. Thank you.
So I have a complicated task to bring you from Antarctic to the Arctic. First of all, thank you very much for the VEU. Thank you very much for Alcantara. It's really a pleasure to be here and present my, my experience. Just a couple of words about European University, very briefly. It's the private university that was established in 1994 in St. Petersburg, the second largest city, former capital of Russia. And we are focusing on human studies, and we have master's degree and postdoc. We don't have any other types of students. And we also do research. Now it's about 250 students and about 65 faculty members and 85 researchers. In our international programs, we focus on foreigners who would like to know more about Russia And we proposed them Russian and Eurasian Studies and another program which is called ENERPO, Energy Politics in Eurasia. This program was traditionally focused on using oil and gas in Russian geopolitics, but since 2 years ago we added sustainability component. We have now sustainable energy and sustainable finance lectures as well. The research center that I represent here is focusing on 3 key areas: energy, clean energy, green finance, and sustainability. I have to say that I'm a practitioner. I spent 12 years in the IFC, International Finance Corporation, doing sustainable energy finance projects in former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. And I remember that we were dealing with one of the largest commercial banks that decided to implement commercial loans for energy efficiency. We faced the communication problem first time. When the bank decided to do seminars on the new commercial loans on energy efficiency, they tried to invite clients to come and attend this seminar. And then the branch manager of the bank complained to me that it's a boring topic, Mr. Maxim. Clients, they don't want to come to your seminar. I said, okay, when you call your client, give me an example. Okay, I'm calling a bakery saying, please, you are a client, come to the seminar. What's the seminar about? It's a seminar about energy efficiency. I'm not selling energy efficiency, says a bakery owner. I'm selling bread. So this is about the right message and the right audience and how you communicate your complex issue. And the more complex issue is, the more difficult is the task to put it in the right way. So I think entertainment is key. And what we tried to do at the European University last year, we got a grant from the presidential administration on the Arctic region. The idea of the grant was to combine social, anthropological, geographical, energy studies about Arctica and fight with stereotypes about the Arctic zone. Just to give you some examples. When I do Google search, I like to use modern technologies. What I can see, ice, polar bear, ice, a map. Then, if you cannot see it, there are some penguins. I don't know why in Arctic there are no penguins. Okay. Then we have a submarine. Well, this is clear. There is probably some. And so this is what people is getting from Google search on the Arctic. Okay. Then if I complicate the task, I ask, tell me about people in the Arctic. So you see dogs, reindeers, indigenous peoples. Then you see Barack Obama. And some traditional housing. So this is like stereotypes. The reality about the Arctic zone, the Russian Arctic zone, is that there are 2.6 million people living there. Out of these 2.6 million people, 150,000 only indigenous people. Most of population in large cities. So again, this is about stereotypes. So what we decided to do, we decided to address children in schools, and we decided to equip school teachers with manual and with some other useful tools to prepare them to deliver a lesson about the Arctic, the Russian Arctic. So at the end of this project, it's just a start as the first phase of the program. They are getting some, as I said, they are getting a manual, how to prepare themselves for this lesson. They have an access to interactive map. You can see the link, it's in Russian. We will have the second phase of the project. We will translate everything to English. But the map, it has multiple layers. You can see demography about the people living in Arctic. You can see what they do, how they spend time, what is the infrastructure, and what are businesses and what kind of leisure in the Russian Arctic zone. It's a tool that will be populated more and more, and we also have now some large companies doing business in the Arctic zone who would like to share their materials, who would like to put their information about their businesses to this instrument. And to entertain kids, we decided to prepare a cartoon. It's a story about a family living in the Russian Arctic. It's in Russian, but it has English subtitles. So I will ask our technical colleagues now to put the video on the screen.
Это Арктика. Здесь есть большие города. Но многие люди живут в поселках, как и моя семья. Родители переехали сюда 20 лет назад. А это я. Сегодня я лечу в универ.
Thank you very much.
so very much. Do we have any questions from the audience? Maybe just one takeaway. As we, make climate change personal and emotional, using all the tools available that we have is of utmost importance. And I thought that's what was really exciting about seeing an animation with humor, something that is applicable to young people, but also to a broader audience. If there are no questions in the room, any final remarks?
Well, yes, it's just a part of our program, and we will do the series of these initiatives, and I hope maybe next time I will tell you more. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Giulia Braga, my colleague at the Connect for Climate program of the World Bank. She's program manager, and she has been leading us to create some incredible activities, activations, and to help really inspire the world to transition. So over to you, Giulia.
Yeah. Thank you, Max. Thank you, everyone. Even if Andrea and Ambassador Vatani left the room, I would like to thank them for inviting us to co-host and provide communication support to today's and tomorrow conversation. It's really a pleasure for us, and really Alcantara has been leading by example since 2009 on sustainability, and as an Italian living abroad, I'm really proud to highlight and celebrate their commitment. I'd like to introduce a short video, and then I'll try to keep it short and sharp, but and welcome any comments and feedback from the audience. Thank you.
We must act, all of us together and with great urgency.
We celebrate today the power of youth to tackle climate change head-on. This is the work of Connect for Climate.
Connect for Climate congratulates young filmmakers that responded to our challenge, share their stories about climate change and what they were seeing.
Se contamos histórias ligadas ao câmbio climático, podemos informar pessoas de uma forma emocional.
This movie is the spirit of the youth demanding change.
Youth are unstoppable.
Connect for Climate uses the power of VR to make people connect with the fashion industry, highlighting positive solutions.
Let's make fashion sustainable. It's your time to make a change now.
People are starting to realize that we need to take care of our planet.
Music is a means by which you can create agreement.
We've got the technology to build a low-carbon, resilient economy, and you guys are part of that.
I think it should be like a thing, to have kids' voices at the UN, because this is our future.
Climate change is hot. It is so hot.
We are uniting for climate.
Uniting for climate.
We can win this race.
I'm stepping up.
I'm stepping up.
I'm stepping up for climate action.
Thank you. So you'll see images and while I speak, because we are approaching our 10th anniversary, so we did quite a lot over the past 10 years. But the fact that we're still here debating how we can accelerate action really gives us a sense of the urgency that we're facing. Connect for Climate is a global partnership program of the World Bank Group dedicated to climate change communication and advocacy and engagement. We work with over 500 partners from around the world, from the most diverse sectors, including academia, civil society organization, media, and really you name it, and to accelerate and scale up climate action. One of our core audiences is youth, and because of that and because of the need to find, as Connie was mentioning earlier, emotional ways for people to engage and connect with complex scientific issues such as climate change, we work with the cultural and creative industries as platforms and means to make people connect. We have several initiatives, including Film for Climate, for example, which is working with the film industry to green the industry within their production chain, but also, promoting screenings. You've seen Piazza Maggiore in Bologna during the G7 environment, where we hosted a series of screenings of climate change documentaries. We support youth stories, and we use youth stories to bring the urgency and their call to action to policymakers. So really, it's a circular system where youth are asking for action. Policymakers needs to be, called upon and empowered to act, and the private sector is supporting the whole conversation. I'd like to share as an example one of our recent initiatives, which is a very powerful virtual reality, immersive and multisensorial installation that we presented at the Venice Film Festival here in Venice last September. It's called X-Ray Fashion, and it's a beautiful example of really how all these different audiences come together. 2 years ago, we launched a call to action to young creatives around the world, and we asked them to send us their pitches and their ideas for a concept linked to climate change and environmental sustainability. And the prize of this competition would have been the production of the virtual reality experience that we did together with Alcantara and Paul Allen's Vulcan production. The story, the winning story, was about the impacts of the fashion industry on people and the planet. This demonstrates that young people really connect with scientific issues through their life and through lifestyle. We produced the installation, which is, as I speak, being showed in Las Vegas at the Magic Fashion Trade Show. We called Francesco Carrozzini, an amazing filmmaker and fashion photographer, to work with the young winners of the competition as a director, as a co-director. So it's also a mentorship, in a sense, story. And really, we are now linking the installation, which is going to be traveling the world in the months to come, to a global campaign where we really address 3 issues: policymakers, consumers and citizens, and the industry. So we're launching a website that is going to have information and practical action that all these 3 audiences can take when it comes to sustainability in the fashion industry. Another great example is a documentary that we presented last year. It's called Youth Unstoppable. You've seen Adrian Grenier, who is executive producer, along Zlator Jewel Kemker, a young, very talented filmmaker from Canada. Zlator started attending United Nations climate conferences as a youth envoy when she was 15 years old, and she kept on filming the coming together of the youth climate movement over 10 years. It's a beautiful story of youth empowerment and really the strong call to action that youth are putting on policymakers and on the private sector. I think the conversation we had here today has been very inspiring. I'm very much looking forward tomorrow to discussing how we can really advance and transition to a low carbon resilient economy. I think it's important to mention that much of the institutional focus, also of the World Bank institutional focus for moving forward, is on adaptation and resilience, and this really is an indicator of the fact that as much as we want to be positive and we are energized about solutions, we also need to be very realistic and understand that there is no more time and we need to come up with solutions now. That said, I'd like to thank you all, and I don't know if there is any question for me or any comment.
Giulia, I would like to thank you for the inspiration you give us and for your engagement. And here is one of the front runners, Puma, who made this T-shirt for the International Year of Biodiversity for our conference. So I would like to give you this as a present for your dedication to the issue of saving the planet. And I think a big motivation is love and respect for Mother Nature. So let's transmit this by fashion to the people.
I'm not sure I can endorse brands, but publicly, no, I'm kidding. I would like to take this opportunity to just still link to X-ray fashion and the conversation about sustainability in the fashion industry. I'm very pleased because in mid-March, on March 14 in Nairobi, together with other 13, 14 UN organizations, we will be launching the UN Alliance for Sustainable Fashion. So this is an example of really how youth stories are, you know, urging policymakers to act and make a difference and really connect for climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulia. And moving right along, I'd like to invite Simon Levin to come up and join us on stage. Simon is a James McDonnell Distinguished University Professor in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Princeton University. And he'll be talking to us about the social dimension of accepting decarbonization. I do hope you pick up on ecological thoughts here. I've got a background in ecology, and I'd love to hear more from you.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you. I want to thank Alcantara, and I want to thank the organizers for including me in this conference. As an academic, I go to a lot of conferences, but this one is unique, and it's been quite an experience, and it's, despite the theme, I think it's been very uplifting for me. I also want to acknowledge, for two reasons, my funding sources. One is to thank them, but also because I'm seeing trends in academia which reflect my own evolution. I actually began my career as a pure mathematician, then moved and became an ecologist because I was concerned about the things we're all concerned about. Here, realized 25 years ago that I couldn't just be an ecologist, I'd have to work with economists. And then in the last 10 years, realized that that meant also addressing not just economics, but the other social sciences and changing social norms and attitudes. And we've heard a lot about that this afternoon, but especially in this session. So scientific consensus is, I don't have to tell the group in this room, is strong on climate change and on many environmental problems, but yet we haven't really taken the actions. Societies haven't taken the actions, and we heard some of the reasons. Today, it's not because we don't know what needs to be done. It's not because the physical and biological science is limited. Of course, there's lots we have to learn there, but it's rather because of a willingness of people and governments to commit to the common good and to cooperate in finding solutions that benefit everyone. These are problems of the commons in which we would all benefit with different activities, but we all have incentives to behave in selfish ways, ones we have to overcome. A lot of this has to do with attitudes. This is a somewhat dated study now from Resources for the Future, but I've found it striking, which is how these attitudes differ among countries. Here is China, Sweden, and the United States, and the differences are dramatic. In China and Sweden, they're quite similar. There's a recognition, this was 20 years ago, that climate change is a problem, that we need to do something about it, and we have to have a willingness to make sacrifices. 95% of the people in China and Sweden, roughly speaking, believe these things. In the US, it was more like 75%, and I would hate to take this survey today. So why is that? How are our opinions and attitudes shaped by the societies in which we live? A lot of it has to do with social norms and attitudes and how we get our opinions from others. This paper, which a number of us were involved with a couple of years ago, called Social Norms as Solutions, it could have been Social Norms as Problems. You see up there one of the most famous examples of social norms, foot binding in China, which was well-established social norm, at least among some groups, for many centuries, and then suddenly changed over a very short period of time. How did it change? There are lots of other examples of sudden changes in social norms, attitudes towards gender equality, towards racial equality, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have time to go into those. So we've become interested in trying to understand how these change. This is a paper that came out of the Bayer Institute in Stockholm and involved a highly interdisciplinary group. people from very different disciplines who have gone through evolution similar to mine with a convergence and interdisciplinary cooperation. Paul Ehrlich, who's one of the participants in that, and I wrote a paper now more than 10 years ago on the evolution of norms. Norms are dynamic. How do they change? How can we get them to change in ways we want? This study was one that comes out of Yale University and George Mason University, which I find very interesting and I think illustrative. These are basically attitudes towards global warming. And you see that just get an idea looking at this diagram, in 2008, more than 50% of the people were either alarmed or concerned. That dropped it 2 years later to about 39%, and now it's back up. Now, why did that happen? Well, undoubtedly it happened because of the financial collapse, when people suddenly thought, I've got other problems, I'll worry about climate change later. So, and now that we've recovered from that financial crisis, people are again turning their attentions to other issues and not seeing growth as greatly at odds with doing something about the environment. So social norms are very dynamic, and they can be easily affected both by exogenous and by endogenous things. The central issues are ones of behavior and culture, equity issues, both intergenerational and intragenerational. How do we get cooperation in the commons, and the dynamics of social norms and institutions? We discount the future, and of course we discount the discount rate, which we saw in the first talk today, was also at the core of Nick Stern's report on the economics of climate change and the importance of doing something about it. We also discount the interests of others. I just flew in today from overseas. Luckily, there are not yet cell phones being used on the airplanes, but you can imagine what life would be if you had to fly from New York to Europe while somebody talked the whole way on a cell phone. We have a collaborative effort at Princeton that involves people from a large number of disciplines on addressing decarbonization issues in the US, in China, but especially in India. And these are 4 bullets that are at the core of what we're doing there. I just want to highlight the third one, though, which is what are the socioeconomic implications of decarbonization? How can the negative implications be minimized? How do we sell decarbonization to the public? We heard that we needed businesses to step forward and tell governments, but we need the citizenry and stockholders to step forward and tell the businesses that they, sorry, I pushed the wrong button. And so we've, on the left there, you see my colleague, Elke Weber, who's a distinguished psychologist, my postdoctoral fellow, Vitor Vasconcelos, and my collaborator, a mathematician, Rick Durrett. And we've been building models that combine behavioral studies that Elke has been leading on attitudes, how people change their attitudes, whom do they listen to, what's the role of the media, et cetera, to try to understand how social norms change, what are the dynamics of the norms, what explains those changes I showed you earlier. A lot of this is inspired by the late Nobel laureate Lynn Ostrom's work called A Polycentric Approach to Climate Change. We heard this in some of the talks where, that is, you've got to build locally and use those as building blocks to create global agreements. You can't start with 200 countries and expect to get that agreement. And so we've also been doing modeling of localized agreements and asking how do we get to global international agreements. I'm happy to talk to anybody about that at dinner tonight. So let me just close by saying that I, as a modeler who then became an ecologist and is concerned with the biophysical and the ecological aspects of climate change, I've come to realize that that the key unknown is understanding how and we've heard about this afternoon, how do we change people's attitudes? How do we create the momentum for forcing corporations and ultimately governments? And I actually think that there's much greater hope for working with corporations and investment funds than with government at this point, and then government will come along. Addressing the social acceptance of decarbonization remains the great challenge. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I just wanted to add to your Yale study numbers that in 2018, actually the newest numbers came out, and the majority of Americans, 73%, believe global warming is happening, and over half, 60%, believe humans are the primary cause. This has been a tangible growth and is definitely a sign that America is also waking up. So,
some parts of America.
If we have any questions or last comments, I'll leave it open to the room. Otherwise,
Georg has it.
Have you also thought through already, in case major disruptions happen, how adaptive responses are likely to look like?
I mean, I think that's the critical question. How robust are the changes? I think what we're seeing is there are probably multiple stable outcomes. You can get locked into particular basins of attraction, and I think that Yale study shows to some extent how those changes can take place. But I don't think we know very well yet the degree to which attitudes are contagious and can switch, and we certainly don't know how external events might be driving things. Yeah.
We've got two more quick questions here in the front, so maybe that lady first.
Thanks, and thanks for a very interesting presentation to round off the afternoon. I just wonder if you could give us a bit more of a taster on your thoughts about how to go from local agreements or national ones to global ones. It just strikes me that most of the most important policy seems to have been developed in regions and subnational rather than national.
Yeah, I mean, this is based to a large extent. I don't know if you know Lynn Ostrom's work, but it was inspired originally by work of Garrett Hardin on what he called the tragedy of the commons, an idea he took from William Forster Lloyd, giving due credit. And what Garrett Hardin said is the solution to this problem is mutual coercion, mutually agreed upon. But he was really thinking about a large role for government. And what Lynn Ostrom showed was that in small societies you could, because of the tight relationships and feedbacks, but also pro-sociality, you were much more likely, it's an example of not in my backyard, you were much more likely to get agreements. If you can get those agreements from the bottom up, then Lynn, in her Nobel laureate speech, made the argument that those could be the building blocks. And the modeling we've been doing is modeling in which individual nations, for example, belong to various consortia. Those are overlapping consortia. So if Italy decides to make a decision as to whether to mitigate or not, it's got to take into account all of the interlocking agreements that it's part of, some of them on health, some of them on trade, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're exploring the degree to which these can be building blocks, and we can build it. But basically the notion is that the further things are away from you, the less you're going to care about them. And so treating the world as a well-mixed place in which everybody cares about everybody else is not going to work. But yeah.
And one last question.
Yeah.
I had a very quick question. The correlation, in fact, the inverse correlation between the financial crisis and the awareness of environment, of climate, do you think that's still, because that was 2008, I think, and 2010, right?
That's right.
Right.
So it's correlational, but I think it's very strongly suggestive. Yeah.
But do you think that's still the case? I mean, because now, now that the adaptation issue has really come into the forefront of the discussion, and it's, you know, it got nearer to the experience of communities and economies and. I mean, would you?
Well, I mean,
what is your guess?
Look,
Is
I
that
mean,
correlation still so strong?
If we had another crisis, financial crisis of the same magnitude as the one we saw 10 years ago, then I think we'd see the same thing. Look, even people like me were saying, okay, we've got to do something to salvage the economy. Now, I'll worry about those other things later, but if the global economies collapse, then we're going to have a whole range of problems. So let's deal with this first. And so I think that must have been a widespread feeling that this rose to the top of people's list, even if they didn't make the connection between, and there's a strong connection between two. Even if you didn't make the connection, it was, I can't worry about that now. But there was a strong connection because the solution to that crisis was stimulating growth, and that was bound to have knock-on effects. So yeah, we don't have any evidence to it, but the fact that it's recovered, I think if we had another crisis, we'd see the same thing.
Thank you, Simon. We're going to end it there, unless there are some more burning questions in the back of the room. No. Well, thank you, Simon. And can I ask you to step into the middle of the stage? Yeah. And a round of applause for all the speakers. Won't you come up from the afternoon session one by one, come to the stage. We're going to do a group photo of the afternoon speakers. We've heard this afternoon how climate finance and sustainability finance is taking off, how there is a correlation between sustainable finance and business opportunity and business growth. It's exciting. Sustainable finance can shift its opinion very quickly. We also heard that society at large need to be a part of this. We heard from Connie that policy leaders have to be a part of this. We heard how communication and engaging today's youth and society is a key element.